A rookie like her flying the B-2? Absurd. They laughed in the briefing room. Every smirk told Captain Selena Ward she didn't belong. She didn't argue, she prepared, and when the call came, she entered the cockpit with fire in her veins. The cockpit was silent. Only her breathing filled the darkness. Captain Selena Ward had 6 hours to erase 12 enemy strongholds. 11 were already burning craters. One remained, heavily defended, swarming with missiles, and the world watching in silence. Every radar locked on her. Every alarm screamed, but her voice stayed calm. Control. This is Spectre. One target left. I'm not turning back. And in that moment, the question wasn't if she would survive. It was whether history itself could keep up with her courage. The first time Captain Selena Ward walked into the briefing room of the 509th Bomb Wing, she could feel the silence change. She was 29 years old, sharp, composed, and undeniably talented. But to the men in that room, she was still the rookie. Not because her flight hours were few, she had logged more sorties than many who sat at the table, but because of something deeper, more ingrained. She was young, she was a woman, and she dared to reach for the most sacred machine in America's aerial arsenal. The B-2 spirit. The smirk said it all, the folded arms, the whispered comments, the dismissive looks. To them, she wasn't ready, and maybe in their world, she never would be. They spoke as if bomber cockpits were carved out of stone and guarded by tradition itself, a place only accessible to men who had earned their stripes through decades of routine, predictable, proven missions. Selena's request to fly the B-2 wasn't just audacious. It was offensive to the very hierarchy that defined them. But Selena had never measured herself by their yardsticks. She grew up in the windswept plains of Montana, where silence carried further than words and skies stretched wider than horizons. Out there, you learned early that survival wasn't about who was oldest or who had the longest resume. It was about who adapted fastest when the weather shifted, when storms rolled in, when the unexpected arrived. That land shaped her. It taught her that leadership is not inherited, it's claimed. Her earliest lessons in flight didn't come from textbooks or classrooms. They came from her uncle, Colonel Arthur Ward, a Cold War veteran who had piloted the massive B-52 Stratofortress in skies crowded with Soviet radar. To him, flying a bomber was never just about muscle memory or following a checklist. It was about thinking 3 moves ahead, playing chess at 40,000 feet, while the world waited for a single mistake. Arthur Ward was not gentle in his teaching. He didn't coddle. When young Selena stumbled over flight calculations in the cockpit of his small civilian plane, he didn't pat her on the shoulder. He asked if she wanted to be just another pilot or one whose decisions bent the outcome of history. He drilled into her the notion that every button pressed, every angle calculated, could ripple across entire nations. For him, bombing wasn't destruction. It was precision, psychology, and discipline under impossible pressure. Those lessons carved Selena's character. While other kids her age spent weekends at malls or football games, she spent them in hangars, studying radar maps, listening to stories about missions that lasted 20 hours, about celestial navigation when electronics failed, about keeping a bomber formation tight when fatigue was crushing. Arthur never hid the weight of responsibility. He told her bluntly, any pilot can fly straight and level, but the one who carries the payload, the one who decides when the world holds its breath, that pilot doesn't just fly, they alter history. By the time Selena enlisted, she was already fluent in the language of airframes, fuel ratios, and tactical maps. She earned her degree in aerospace engineering not to impress anyone, but to understand the machines she demanded to command. And when she graduated top of her class in flight school, nobody could deny her skill. Yet still, they whispered, and here lies the heart of the doubt. Not in her own mind, but in theirs. Because institutions don't change as quickly as individuals. The Air Force loved her talent but distrusted her age. They admired her intellect but doubted her gender. For every flawless sortie she flew in an F-16, there was another general ready to say, not yet, she's not ready. But Selena carried Montana with her. She carried her uncle's voice, reminding her that storms don't wait for permission, and neither should she. Each dismissal didn't weaken her resolve. It hardened it. Each doubt became fuel. Each smirk became another mile she would push harder, fly further. And here's the commentary, the part that stings beyond the cockpit. Society does this everywhere. We underestimate youth because we confuse age with wisdom. We underestimate women because tradition has long mistaken physical presence for intellectual force. How many ideas, how many breakthroughs, how many missions in history have been delayed or denied simply because the person presenting them didn't look the part? Selena Ward's story isn't just about a pilot asking for a bomber. It's about every boardroom where a young voice is laughed out, every classroom where a girl is told she's not cut out for math, every family where ambition is silenced by convention. The stakes may differ, but the pattern is the same. Those in power often guard the gates, not against incompetence, but against change. In that briefing room, when they laughed, Selena didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or fight for validation. She simply waited, because she knew something they didn't. Storms always come, and when they do, the world doesn't ask who is experienced enough. It asks who is ready. And Selena Ward had been ready her whole life. By the time Captain Selena Ward strapped herself into the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon, she had already carried years of doubt on her shoulders. Yet in the sky, those doubts burned away. Up there, she wasn't the rookie or the woman who didn't belong. She was simply velocity, instinct, and precision. Her peers called her focused. Her instructors called her gifted. But in the field under fire, she earned a different name, Spectre. The call sign was born not in ceremony, but in whispered awe during her first deployment over Syria. The mission was supposed to be routine close air support, a convoy pinned down requesting assistance. But the skies above Syria were not friendly, and the radar landscape was a minefield of surface-to-air missiles waiting for any mistake. When the call came, Selena was already climbing, already calculating. She didn't storm in. She slipped in. Radar operators on the ground would later report confusion. They expected the roar of jets, the buildup of noise, the chase of blips across screens. Instead, Selena appeared like silence itself. One moment, nothing. The next, fire rained down with surgical precision. Convoys of enemy armor erupted into flame, and before anti-aircraft systems could react, she was gone. Like a ghost, one soldier said. She was there, and then she wasn't. The nickname stuck, Spectre, and with every mission after that, she lived up to it. She didn't fight with brute force. She fought with timing, unpredictability, and an almost eerie ability to read the battlefield 3 steps ahead. Over the course of 89 sorties in Syria, Selena developed a reputation that spread far beyond her own squadron. Her methods became whispers among ground troops who felt her presence like a shadow overhead. She wasn't the loud, thunderous flyover that reassured by sound. She was the precision strike that ended firefights before they began. Entire enemy positions would suddenly collapse because ammunition depots had detonated or command trucks had vanished under the force of a single strike. To the enemy, she was terrifying. To her allies, she was salvation. What set her apart was not only her flawless execution, but her way of thinking. Most pilots memorized doctrine and flew within the predictable patterns of their training. Selena bent those patterns. She approached flight like a chess match played at supersonic speed, moving where the enemy least expected, striking in angles they hadn't considered. She was not reckless. She was adaptive. And in war, adaptation is the sharpest weapon. Her squadron didn't fully realize it at first, but Selena was reshaping the rules of engagement. Traditional air campaigns relied on mass, force, and volume. More planes, more bombs, more sound. But Selena demonstrated that one aircraft, flown with innovation, could multiply force beyond measure. She didn't just hide from radar, she used it. She learned to ride the edges of detection cones, using blind spots as corridors, slipping between enemy nets. In one mission, she coordinated with ground forces using only timing and coded brevity, striking exactly when their suppressive fire masked her approach. Spectre wasn't about being unseen, it was about being unpredictable. And here's the truth. Innovators never look like what tradition expects. When Selena returned from missions, she didn't strut into the debrief with bravado. She didn't boast, didn't match the swagger that so many in the fighter community wore like armor. Instead, she quietly studied her tapes, rewrote her notes, refined her methods. Some called her cold. Others thought she lacked fighter spirit. But the results silenced those doubts. This is the paradox of innovation. The ones who redefine the rules almost never look like the heroes the rulebook describes. Selena Ward didn't fit the mold of the loud, charismatic ace pilot. She didn't wear her ego like a flight patch. She was methodical, analytical, quietly relentless. And that was why she was dangerous to the enemy and indispensable to her command. Think about it beyond the cockpit. How many times in life have we dismissed someone because they didn't fit the look of what we expected? A leader too young, a voice too soft, a thinker too unconventional. Society clings to templates of what competence should look like, forgetting that true breakthroughs come from those who step outside the template. The irony was bitter. Back in the United States, generals still called her too inexperienced for the B-2 bomber. Yet in Syria, her record spoke otherwise. 0 mission failures, 0 aircraft damage, a 100% success rate. If that isn't readiness, what is? But that's the story of underestimation, isn't it? People often confuse experience with capability. They think years automatically translate to readiness, ignoring the reality that some individuals compress lifetimes of skill into a handful of crucibles. Selena didn't need decades in a cockpit to prove herself. She had already lived 100 lifetimes in those 89 sorties. Every close call, every missile lock, every night spent alone in the sky over enemy territory carved her sharper than tradition ever could. She was already ready. The problem wasn't her. The problem was that the system couldn't see her. By the end of her Syrian deployment, Spectre was no longer just a nickname. It was a reputation, a symbol, a warning to enemies and a reassurance to allies. And for Selena, it was proof. Proof that her instincts, her innovation, her refusal to fit the mold were not weaknesses. They were her strength. But she knew the hardest battle was still ahead. Not in foreign skies, but in briefing rooms where tradition sat in uniform, arms crossed, smirking. Because sooner or later, she wouldn't just be asked to save a convoy or silence an enemy stronghold. She would be asked to do the impossible, and when that moment came, she would be ready. General Nathaniel Briggs was the kind of officer who carried history in his posture. At 55 years old, with 3 decades of bomber operations etched into his resume, he was the embodiment of Air Force tradition. His hair was silver, his shoulders squared, his voice measured in the deliberate cadence of authority. To younger officers, he looked like the model of stability. To Selena Ward, he represented the wall she had been pushing against her entire career. Briggs commanded the 509th Bomb Wing, the crown jewel of America's strategic bomber force. To him, the B-2 Spirit wasn't just an aircraft, it was a temple, a machine reserved for only the most seasoned, proven, battle-hardened aviators. He had flown countless long-range missions himself, sitting through 20-hour flights across hostile skies in the lumbering but resilient B-52 Stratofortress. He believed that the right to command the Air Force's most advanced bomber was earned only through decades of repetition, patience, and traditional experience. So when Captain Selena Ward, 29 years old, brilliant, but in his eyes still green, raised her hand for a B-2 assignment, Briggs didn't laugh. He didn't need to. His silence, his clipped "not yet," carried the weight of dismissal far heavier than mockery. To him, innovation was a luxury, not a necessity. War, as he understood it, was won by discipline, structure, and following the methods that had never failed him. His worldview was forged in an era when flight crews were entirely male, when procedures were passed down like sacred scripture, and when deviation from doctrine was seen not as genius, but as recklessness. Then came the intelligence reports, satellite images, intercepted communications, field assessments. 12 enemy bases, constructed in secrecy, now formed a vast defensive web across a strategic region. Each base was a fortress unto itself. Hardened bunkers, subterranean command centers, and advanced anti-aircraft systems imported from rival powers. More than that, the bases were interlinked. Their radar arrays overlapped. Their missile networks provided mutual coverage, and their command infrastructure meant that if one was attacked, the others would respond instantly. It was, in every sense, a network designed to bleed conventional assault forces dry. A standard strike package of fighters, drones, and cruise missiles would be swatted down like flies. A massed bomber campaign would be suicide. Too slow, too predictable, too costly. The Pentagon's analysts were blunt. The 12 bases had to be eliminated simultaneously. If even a fraction survived, they would coordinate a retaliation capable of destabilizing the entire region. And so, the impossible requirement emerged. One aircraft, one pilot, flying into the densest web of air defenses ever constructed, delivering precision strikes to 12 targets in a single mission. Every eye turned to the 509th Bomb Wing. Every eye, in theory, turned to Briggs. Briggs's instinct was immediate. Give the mission to Colonel Jake Anderson, his most senior B-2 pilot. Anderson was solid, dependable, a man who had flown dozens of stealth missions without incident. He was, in Briggs's mind, the perfect man for the job. Seasoned, unshakable, safe. But safe wouldn't be enough. Selena Ward sat in the briefing, quietly watching as the generals mapped out traditional flight paths and conventional approaches. Every option collapsed under the weight of the enemy's defenses. To succeed, the pilot would have to improvise, adapt mid-flight, think like water flowing through cracks rather than stones smashing against walls. She cleared her throat, presenting an alternative plan. Irregular flight patterns, timing that exploited gaps in radar rotations, weapons deployment sequences customized in-flight rather than pre-scripted. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had already lived these split-second decisions in Syria, someone who had learned to turn unpredictability into survival. Briggs's response was cutting. Captain Ward, this mission requires experience you do not have. The B-2 is not a fighter jet you dance around enemy radar with. It is strategic. It requires discipline, precision, and frankly, patience that only comes with years. The room went quiet. Selena didn't argue. She simply placed her data on the table. Maps, calculations, patterns no one else had seen. She didn't raise her voice, but the implication was clear. Tradition couldn't solve this. Innovation could. And here is where the story transcends the military setting. Resistance to change is universal. Every institution, whether in the Air Force or in civilian life, has its Nathaniel Briggs. The leader who clings to what worked yesterday, blind to the fact that tomorrow's challenges don't play by yesterday's rules. To Briggs, Selena was not just a young pilot. She was a threat to the order he had spent a lifetime defending. But that is the paradox of progress. The very people who guard tradition often do so not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that the world they mastered has shifted, that their wisdom might no longer be enough. Briggs wasn't evil. He was simply trapped by his own success. The methods that had kept him alive were now the very chains that bound his imagination. The 12 bases became more than a tactical challenge. They were a metaphor. Each one represented a barrier of tradition, a fortress of the way things have always been done. Taken together, they were overwhelming, seemingly impregnable. And yet history shows us, no fortress is eternal. Whether in war, business, or society, defenses built on old assumptions eventually fall to new tactics. When the old ways fail, the only choice is to let someone new lead. Briggs could not see it, but Selena Ward could. She didn't just see 12 enemy bases. She saw the cracks. She saw the spaces in between. She saw not what was, but what could be. The stage was set. On one side, General Briggs, standing as the immovable guardian of tradition. On the other, Selena Ward, the pilot forged by doubt, sharpened by Syria, ready to prove that innovation was not recklessness, it was survival. The mission briefing ended with a choice still unmade, a question hanging heavy in the air. Would Briggs cling to the comfort of experience, or risk everything on the pilot who embodied the future? The resistance was real. The stakes were absolute. And history, as always, waited for the bold. The runway lights at Whiteman Air Force Base glowed faintly against the night sky as the B-2 Spirit, tail number 88-033, rolled forward. To most, it was just another bomber. To Captain Selena Ward, it was the crucible where she would prove not only her worth, but the very idea that innovation could triumph over tradition. Operation Silent Dagger was already infamous among the few cleared to know of it. 12 enemy bases, 12 impossible targets, each one ringed by a wall of defenses designed specifically to defeat American doctrine. The analysts said it could not be done. General Briggs said it required a seasoned pilot. Selena said nothing. She simply climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The Spirit's engines whispered more than roared, propelling her into the black void of sky. Once airborne, the base behind her fell silent, and so did the world inside the cockpit. Only her breathing filled the darkness. The B-2 was not a nimble fighter jet. It was massive, deliberate, designed for stealth more than speed. But in Selena's hands it became something else, an extension of her own instincts. She had studied every contour of its systems, not to memorize steps, but to understand why they worked, and how they could be bent when necessary. Her flight path was not the clean arc of a training manual. It was jagged, irregular, flowing like water through the cracks of radar coverage. Where doctrine said to fly high, she skimmed low over mountain ridges. Where radar expected her at one vector, she curved into another. She wasn't hiding from radar. She was dancing with it. Her first target was the enemy's command and control hub, the brain of the 12-base network. Precision demanded patience, but too much patience meant detection. Selena threaded her path through a narrow corridor between overlapping radar fields, holding her breath as the warning systems blinked red, then green again. Spectre, target 1 locked. Her voice was steady as she released the first precision-guided weapon. The explosion came seconds later, a silent bloom of fire on the horizon. Enemy operators scrambled in confusion, half their coordination severed before they knew they were under attack. Targets 2 and 3 fell quickly, but by the 4th, the enemy was awake. Anti-aircraft missiles lanced into the night, their contrails glowing like vengeful comets. Selena didn't respond with panic. She adjusted flight angles by degrees, shaving seconds off radar lock, using the B-2's stealth skin and terrain masking to turn the massive bomber into something nearly untouchable. Most pilots train to avoid risk by following procedure. Selena embraced risk by understanding principle. She knew how radar waves bent, how missile guidance faltered, how timing windows overlapped. She didn't escape by luck. She escaped because she thought like an engineer, not just a pilot. By the 8th strike, she was no longer following her own plan. She was writing a new one mid-flight, altering bomb loads, recalculating trajectories, using what the battlefield gave her. This was not recklessness. This was mastery. Inside the cockpit, however, it was not glamorous. Sweat trickled down her back beneath the flight suit. Her hands stayed steady, but her heart pounded in rhythm with the alarms. For 6 hours, she would be alone. No wingman, no second crew, no voice to reassure her. Only the hum of instruments, the glow of screens, and the knowledge that millions were depending on her. And that is the part history often forgets. We celebrate the explosions, the victories, the maps with enemy bases erased. But inside the cockpit, it is one human being, utterly alone, carrying the weight of nations in their hands. Selena knew that if she failed, Briggs would be proven right. Tradition would be vindicated, and innovation would be buried for another generation. That knowledge pressed heavier than gravity, yet her voice never trembled. Control, Spectre. Target 8 neutralized. Moving to 9. Targets 9 and 10 lay within the densest cluster of defenses. By now, every radar was searching for her, every missile battery primed. She had degraded their systems with earlier strikes, but the remaining strongholds were desperate, throwing everything skyward. Selena banked the B-2 into maneuvers that textbooks would have deemed impossible for a bomber of its size. She cut across radar cones at oblique angles, timed decoy flares with near-perfect precision, and in one heart-stopping moment, descended so low the aircraft's sensors screamed warnings of terrain collision. It worked. Missiles clawed at empty sky while her payload found its mark. 11. And then, the last. The 12th target was the most heavily defended installation, bristling with weapons, its defenses overlapping in every direction. Briggs's traditional plan had never accounted for this. No pilot could survive such density. But Selena wasn't playing by the old playbook. She remembered her uncle's words. Any pilot can fly straight and level. The one who changes history bends the impossible into possible. With radar overwhelmed from the destruction of its companions, she slipped in on an angle no one would have dared. Low, fast, unpredictable. The last base erupted in fire, its command structure shattered. When she turned the B-2 homeward, the silence of the cockpit deepened. No more alarms, no more locks, just the echo of her own breath. "Control," she whispered, calm as ever. "Spectre reporting. All 12 targets eliminated." And in that silence, the truth rang louder than any explosion. The mission hadn't been won by tradition, nor by raw experience, but by innovation, by confidence, by one pilot's refusal to let doubt define her. This is the difference between memorizing rules and understanding principles. The innovator sees not only the procedure, but why the procedure exists, and thus sees where it can be broken. That is what Selena did. She saw the gaps, the spaces in between, the opportunities invisible to those who only followed. And this is not just about the sky. In every field, business, science, even our daily lives, progress belongs to those who understand principles deeply enough to bend them, to adapt when the situation demands. For 6 hours, Selena Ward had been alone. Alone against missiles, alone against doubt, alone against the very weight of history. But she had proven something that could no longer be ignored. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of conviction when no one else believes. And as the Spirit glided back toward friendly skies, the world would never see her as too inexperienced again. The operations center held its breath. On every monitor, flames marked the ruins of 12 enemy bases. The mission no one believed possible was complete. Then her voice came through the static. "Control, this is Spectre. All 12 targets eliminated." For a moment, silence. Officers stared at each other, stunned. General Nathaniel Briggs, the man who had insisted she was too inexperienced, stood frozen. All his arguments, all his certainty, collapsed in the face of undeniable success. He finally spoke, his tone stripped of arrogance. "Spectre, return to base." When Captain Selena Ward landed at Whiteman Air Force Base, the hangar was crowded. Pilots, engineers, ground crew, all gathered, not with smirks or whispers, but with awe. She stepped down from the B-2's ladder, her boots hitting the concrete with quiet finality. Briggs was waiting. He raised his hand in a crisp salute, one held longer than regulation required. "Captain Ward," he said, his voice steady, "today you didn't just fly a mission. You redefined what this aircraft and this command is capable of." Within days, the announcement followed. Selena Ward was promoted to major, entrusted with leading a strategic bombing unit. Operation Silent Dagger became required study material. Her tactics, irregular flight paths, adaptive targeting, exploiting principles rather than procedures, were adopted into doctrine. Where once she had been told not ready, she was now the standard. But the shockwave didn't end with the Air Force. It crossed briefing rooms and classrooms, the story spread. The underestimated pilot who proved the impossible. Officers began to ask, if we were wrong about her, who else have we overlooked? Because that's the truth. Progress rarely comes from the comfortable. It comes from those dismissed, doubted, told they can't. Selena had carried that label for years. Now it became her badge of honor. Think about it. How often have you heard the words, "not enough experience"? Maybe in a job interview, a promotion, a dream you shared. Tradition loves to shut doors with those words. Too young, too new, too different. But Selena's flight proves something vital. Innovation doesn't wait. Courage doesn't check age or titles. Progress belongs to those who see solutions others miss, who step forward when tradition tells them to step back. General Briggs wasn't a villain. He was simply trapped in his own past successes. And that's often the greatest resistance to change, not hatred, but fear. Fear that the world has moved on without us. Yet through it all, Selena never gloated. She didn't rub her victory in Briggs's face. She spoke of responsibility. "Any pilot can fly straight and level," she reminded them, "but carrying the weight of history requires conviction." That conviction, more than missiles or stealth, had carried her through. Alone in the cockpit, surrounded by radar locks and alarms, she trusted herself when no one else did. So let me ask you, have you ever been told you weren't ready? That you lacked experience? That you didn't belong? Selena's story is a reminder. Those words are not a stop sign. They're a challenge. The people who change history rarely fit the mold. They're the ones with the courage to act when the world doubts them. Major Selena Ward didn't just destroy 12 enemy bases. She destroyed 12 excuses, 12 barriers of tradition, 12 arguments that said innovation must wait its turn. So the next time someone tells you you're not ready, remember this. Progress has never waited. Progress has always belonged to the ones who dared. In the end, Major Selena Ward's story isn't just about stealth bombers or classified missions. It's about something every American can recognize. The struggle of being underestimated, the fight to be heard when others say you're not ready. How many of us have been told we're too young to lead, too old to change careers, too inexperienced to try? In workplaces, in families, even in communities, those same words echo, not enough. But Selena's victory shows us that what matters isn't the years on your resume, but the conviction in your choices. Innovation doesn't belong only to the seasoned, it belongs to the brave. And in modern America, whether it's technology, healthcare, education, or even politics, we still wrestle with that same question. Do we cling to the way things have always been done, or do we give space for new voices to lead us forward? Think about it. If the Air Force had silenced Selena's ideas, 12 enemy bases would still stand. What happens today when fresh ideas in medicine, clean energy, or social change are ignored because the messenger doesn't fit the mold? And here I'd like to turn it to you. Have you faced a moment where someone told you you weren't ready, yet you proved them wrong? Or do you believe, like General Briggs once did, that experience should always outweigh innovation? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If Selena's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about your own path, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us, the underestimated can change everything.